What is up, everybody? Welcome back to Make It Kustom. I'm Carl Fisher, and I'm working on my wife's 1960 Cadillac Coupe de Ville, doing some rust repair on it, as well as working on the body drop that we did on this car. And so this video is one that a lot of people have been asking about: how to weld thin sheet metal with a TIG welder. Why and how do you do it to make it, easy, I guess. So this video, I'm gonna make a couple of panels. We're gonna form these. This is in-depth look at how I formed this panel here, which the weld is actually right in here. So it's got like a tapered cone effect here with sort of a tipped flange area there. And then I've also got a panel right here that has a bunch of different shapes in it. And I'm just gonna show you guys how I kind of transfer and look at a piece and sort of think about how I'm gonna make that piece and how is it gonna fit into my panel. And why did I cut it where I did? Why did I make it where I'd made it? And then we're gonna go over the steps I take to ensure that my TIG welds are going to be as good as I can make them. I'm certainly not the best in the world, but I try my hardest to make really nice TIG welds, and the fit is very important. So how we fit up panels to weld them nicely is kind of the most important thing, and what I'm covering in this video. If you haven't already, don't forget to like, click subscribe, hit notifications. Really helps me out. Thank you very much for that. And let's get into the video. All right, so the plan is to continue on this. I have some edges I've got to turn. I've got a piece underneath here that I want to make. I didn't want to make it as one piece with this panel. It was just a little bit too difficult. It certainly can be done, but it's going to be a little bit easier for me to make it separately because there's a lot of shape that goes into even a simple piece like this. It's got a bunch of bends in it just to line it all up. It's easier to make that piece first. So that's what's going to happen right now, is I'm going to make these pieces, turn that edge, and then also up underneath here, I want to cut away that rusted material and just keep fitting this panel and that inside trunk drop down that we made in an earlier video. So that's what I'm gonna get started on. Let's do it. All right, so this is kind of a bit of a tricky little piece here. It's got a bunch of different curves in it. It's one of those things, it's only got a couple little rust spots. You could technically just kind of zap it up, but I'm gonna show you how to make this piece. So what I've got is my tape template traced out on a piece of metal. I've left a little extra on the edges. This is where it spot welds, and anyway. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start with this straight bend here. This is actually straight, this is here. That bend right here, it tapers off to nothing at this end, which is this end. So I'm gonna stick that in my brake. I'm gonna bend that to 90 degrees, and then we're gonna start massaging this in. It might take a little bit of stretching, but this line is right in here. It's kind of a soft line here, and it gets a little sharper right there. And I think that we can get a lot of that with the bead roller and the soft lower die. It might take some hammering as well to kind of force it into submission, so to speak. You can see here that this would be a stretched area because it starts flat here and it has to end up going in. That area I know will be stretched. This is not so much, but because it tapers in and kind of does that, this taper, that area will need some stretch. So I might actually pre-stretch that a little bit with a hammer and just add some material by stretching in that one area before we massage it with the bead roller. And you'll see, just step by step, you work at it and kind of see what the piece needs. You'll be able to make a piece like that. So I'm gonna go ahead, break this edge, and then I'm going to start on stretching a little bit here because I know it needs it, and then we will hammer and massage with the bead roller and get this shape in here. I'm not gonna cut this out yet. This is an access, this little half moon piece, that is an access for a bolt that's here. I think it's a bumper adjuster. It's almost like a hood bumper, but for whatever reason it's there, and it's got a 10 gauge little plate here, and it's important, so we're gonna cut that out as the last thing that we do. Let's do it. All right, well, here's that piece all bent up. I ended up making 2 of them because the other side needs it as well. Might as well do them at the same time. It fits pretty decent. It's at the point now where we got to cut some material away so that we can really fit it up close. But that is the piece. It's a sharp corner here. We've got 1/2 inch radius here. I just did this on the T-dolly. We've got like a curved T-dolly. There's a slight curve in here. A lot of this type of work is just basically beating it into submission. Like, you just need to have different shapes that you can hammer on. I pretty much only used 1 hammer, 1 or 2 hammers to do this, just a planishing hammer and then a high crown hammer. Like I said in the beginning, we stretched a bunch here using the pick end of one of the hammers. So we got a little bit of stretch in there. I didn't need to use the shrinker stretcher for the flanges. It just worked out that the stretch that we put in here, as well as hammering it on the T-dolly, did stretch it enough for it to be the shape we want it. So that is all out of one piece. It's got a few different curves in it, and it fits pretty dang good. So the next step is trimming some of this stuff away so that we can get it closer and cleco it together. Then this piece will get welded to this panel, and we'll move on from there. All right, so I got this piece fitted up, welded on. The important thing to remember here is just a tight fit. I like to use one side of the Sharpie as my line. That's how how I'm pretty precise about it, is I know exactly what side of the Sharpie my line is, and that helps me keep it super, super tight. This is all just fusion TIG, basically. If you can get your panel super tight, you can just go along with the TIG and just zap it, and it will melt it together. That's why people prefer, well, one of the reasons people prefer TIG welding for this type of sheet metal is that it's so precise. You're not adding more material than you need. And then we use really thin TIG wire to fill. There's very little stuff to grind. That's how I like to put panels together, is you tack them a bunch, and then you can actually fully weld them, like just weld right straight through them. You don't have to, zap around and move your heat around, because it's gonna shrink a little bit, and if it's accessible, we can stretch it back out with a hammer and dolly and then just kind of finish it up. The next step is making some more pieces here. I want to replace all the rust around here and show you guys the process in making these pieces. So this panel is next. I'm gonna paper template that and get to shaping. I don't see a ton of shape in this panel, really. What we're doing is we're deleting the pinch weld here that used to be the trunk floor when it was before the body drop. There was that pinch weld here. We're gonna cut all that out. Make this just a smooth panel. It's rounded here where the tail light is. You can see this, it's rounded there. It looks like the flange flattens out a little bit, so I'll need to stretch this area a little, maybe. The flange has a little bit of shape here, but it's not much. It's just a couple of little angles that it comes down and then flattens out a little bit on that flange. It's not super, super critical, so I'm just gonna beat one out of some sheet metal, and that'll be that. The last piece will be to replace the rust on this lip. This little lip here has some grossness in there, so I'm just gonna make a little patch for here that includes this edge, and that'll be that for this side, and I gotta do the exact same thing to the other side. We'll also have to install this little bumper back on the side we're working on right now. This side doesn't need a big patch panel, but it is pretty pitted, so I am gonna replace, you know, a good, let's see, maybe, I don't know, 3-4 inches of this. It's gonna be a pretty simple panel too, but I'm gonna get onto that as well. Make a new inner piece for the other side here, so because we're gonna do the same delete, just cut this pinch weld right out of there and replace this rust at the same time. That's coming up next. All right, so here is the panel. It is pretty simple. Like I said, it's not a critical panel that has to be exactly stuck because this thing is custom. There it is, sort of fits on there okay. It will need a little bit of tuning, some trimming. Oh, I'm not even showing it to you. Yeah, there it is. Fits on there okay. It's got that little step in it. That really wasn't much. That was just a bit of stretching right on this edge here. I was able to just kind of beat that down. Looks nice. This was a little bit of stretching on this flange here. I'm quite happy with it. I did just kind of use the bead roller and run a bit of a crease here. I ended up having to move that crease over when I fitted up the first time. It wasn't quite in the right spot, so I just actually did this on the edge of the table. Just beat it over the edge as I was turning the metal. But no shape really in here. I just let it be what it is. Made my cone shape of bend by just hammering, you know, over top of a T-dolly and just using whatever shapes I had. Worked out pretty good. So there's the panel. I'm gonna clean it up more, I'm gonna fit it up more, but it's roughed in for now. That's what I'm gonna do next, fix that all up. And then the final piece is making this piece here, which is rusted right at the bottom with that edge. Once this is all cut out, I'm gonna address this crease in here. There's a crease right there, but once it's cut out, I'll be able to get to it with a dolly and we'll grind away some of this Bondo. This car had an accident at some point. That's part of the reason why this is so big, is because there's a big dent up in here I can see. I'll try and get as much of that out as I can, and we'll fit this up a little bit better, get some clecos in it, and then we'll make this other piece. Okay, so I'm about ready to weld this. I want to go over TIG welding thin sheet metal. It's something that a lot of people struggle with, And there is no real secret to the way you weld it. It's actually one of the easiest things to weld. The secret is in fitting your panels so that they can be welded easily. If you have a gap in your panel, like your panel doesn't fit nice, you're gonna have a big time struggle TIG welding it. You're just gonna burn that metal away. What happens when we're TIG welding thin sheet metal is that if there is a tiny gap, then that arc of your tungsten is going to melt that gap away. It'll melt a little bit on each side, and then they'll start to go farther apart. Then you've got to like try and, you know, bridge it with your wire or whatever. But if you have a tight panel fit and you can fusion TIG weld them together, that's optimal. That's not always the case. There can be a slight gap where a fusion weld will not work, but you can use the wire. You don't want your gap between the panels to be any larger than the thickness of the material. And we're talking thousandths of an inch then, right? This is, I think it's about 40 thou, 18 gauge. If I'm not mistaken, it's about 40 thou, 45 thou. This wire here is 040 TIG rod. You can use, and I have always used in the past until recently, MIG wire. Actually, a guy on here told me about the chemical composition of the rod being a little bit different. They work. You can use 035 MIG wire for welding this stuff. You don't want to use a thicker rod. You don't want to use a 1/16 rod. You can do it, but it takes so much heat to heat up that 1/16 rod, which is thicker than your material. 1/16 is 063. So it's actually like 30% thicker or 50% thicker than your material, which is too much. It takes too much heat. It means your panel's gonna have too much heat. So you want a tiny gap with a tiny rod. This is 040, this panel is 040, and my gap, luckily on this panel, is very, very tight, right? I was able to fusion weld, tack that all together, and the ease of TIG welding this is because that panel is fit mint. I mean, some guys will use the pulse features and stuff. That actually keeps the metal a little bit cooler. For me, I just throttle it up till it makes a puddle, and I just run it right along and make sure you're getting good penetration and just weld the whole thing. It's gonna heat and contract a little bit, but because it's a panel that's off a car, we can hand hammer that back out and you won't have so much material in there. That's the other beautiful thing that I need to talk about when you're welding thin sheet metal with a TIG rod or with a TIG torch, is that you have almost no extra metal to grind. You can actually see how much metal is going in there, and it shouldn't have to be any thicker than the material. Maybe a little bit, like if you're dabbing along, you've got a bit of a proud weld, but hardly anything. Like 80 grit on a roll lock, like a 3-inch grinding disc, 80 grit, should be able to take that off like right now. And so you've spent all that extra time in preparing your weld joint, but you're saving at least that amount of time in how much grinding you're gonna have to do afterwards, or at least that's sort of the trade-off. That's the yin and yang of the situation. So when you're welding sheet metal, it is actually easier to do it this way and will take less effort if you take the steps to make sure that your panel fits super nice. So I'm gonna show you guys me welding this. I'm gonna actually tape, I took your suggestion, I got those lenses, so I'm gonna tape one to the phone, we're gonna try it, and you'll see me weld this in real time, and it doesn't take very long to weld. You just run it all the way across. So I'll show you that right now. All right, so that's it for this video. We got a couple of pieces made, a little bit more progress on the 60 Cadillac Coupe de Ville. I'm really stoked. This body drop is coming along nicely. I'm gonna burn on the other side in the meantime, get it up to speed. But overall, I'm just really happy with it, and I hope that you guys learned something about TIG welding, thin sheet metal. Panel fitment is 90% of it. It is 90% of it. I feel like MIG welding is 90% welder settings and technique, and 10% fit up, because there's a lot of room for error. You don't have to have really precise stuff. But with TIG welding, it's the other way around. You've got 90% fit up and 10% welding, because really, if your fitting is perfect, your welding is easy. So that should be your takeaway there. As far as forming things out of one piece, you just gotta kind of observe the piece and look for shrink, look for stretch, and then decide what makes the most sense in that panel and what shapes you've got around to be able to utilize, or even make your own dollies, whatever, to make stuff like this. So thanks a lot for watching Make It Kustom, everybody. I really appreciate you guys. The likes, the love, the comments, the questions, the messages, it's all amazing. Our Black Friday sale went amazing as well. We sold a ton of merch. We thank you guys for that. I know a lot of it's coming from YouTube. Thanks a lot. Don't forget to like, click subscribe, hit notifications. We'll catch you on the next one. Bye-bye, everybody.